My name is Rachel, and I am 26 years old. If you're watching this, please do me a favor before I go any deeper into my story. Hit the like button right now, and comment where you're watching from, and let me know if you've ever been betrayed by family the way I was. I promise you, you won't want to miss a single word of what I'm about to share, because it's the kind of betrayal that changes a person forever. I grew up in a house where love always came with conditions. My parents were not cruel in the way strangers might be cruel, but they were selective, calculated, and measured with their affection. I was the oldest child, the one expected to set the example, the one expected to be perfect, while my younger brother, Marcus, was the golden boy. No matter what I did, I was never enough. If I brought home good grades, my mother would say, "That's what's expected." If Marcus brought home average ones, they would throw him a small celebration. It wasn't about fairness, it was about favoritism, and that favoritism cut into me like a knife that never quite healed. By the time I was a teenager, I learned to swallow my feelings. I pretended their words didn't hurt. I smiled when I was overlooked, and I clapped when Marcus got praised for doing less than half of what I did. But inside, I was slowly being chipped away. I kept hoping one day they would see me, really see me, and realize I had been carrying the weight of this family on my back since the moment I was old enough to understand responsibility. But that day never came. Instead, what came was betrayal in its rawest form. And it happened not in the shadows, not behind closed doors, but right there at our family dinner table, where I thought at least we could maintain some fragile peace. I was 24 when it happened. We had gathered around the oak table that had been in our family for generations. My mother had polished it until it gleamed. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, and for a fleeting second, I thought maybe, just maybe, this night would be different. We'd laugh, we'd share stories, and maybe they'd treat me as though I belonged. But life has a way of snatching hope just as you start to taste it. Marcus cleared his throat. He had that smug smile on his face, the one that always made my stomach tighten. "There's something we need to talk about," he said. He looked at me, and I could tell instantly that whatever was coming would not be good. "Rachel," he said, his voice loud enough for every ear in the room to hear, "you don't belong in this family anymore." The words hit me like a slap. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of twisted joke. But he didn't laugh. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and let the silence stretch. My parents stared down at their plates. My cousin Clara, who had been invited to dinner that night, smirked as though she had been waiting for this moment. I said, "What are you talking about?" My voice trembled, though I tried to steady it. "You've always been different," Marcus sneered. "Always thinking you're better than the rest of us. But you're not. You're just a burden. You take up space, but you don't belong here." My fork slipped from my hand and clattered onto the plate. I turned to my mother, waiting for her to say something, to scold him for such cruelty. But she kept her head down, slicing her chicken as though nothing had happened. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. And in that silence, I heard the truth louder than words. They agreed with him. Clara snickered. Finally, someone said it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake them and demand they tell me why they treated me this way, why they allowed Marcus to throw daggers at me while they sat there like statues. But instead, I felt the tears burn behind my eyes. And for the first time, I didn't fight them. I let one slide down my cheek. I wiped it quickly and whispered, "Fine. If that's what you think, I'll step away. I'll step away from the family account too." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Marcus frowned, confused, but too arrogant to question. My mother's knife paused mid-slice, but she still didn't speak. My father cleared his throat, but then coughed into his napkin to avoid saying anything. No one chased my words. No one asked what I meant. No one cared. At least, not yet. I stood, excused myself, and walked out of that dining room. The sound of Clara's laugh followed me down the hallway like a ghost I couldn't shake. That night, in the quiet of my room, I packed a bag. Not clothes, not keepsakes, but paperwork. Documents they didn't know I had, files they never bothered to read, agreements they thought were irrelevant. I held them in my hands and thought, if they don't want me in this family, Maybe it's time they see just how much I've been holding up for them all these years. But I didn't act right away. Revenge is not a fire you start in anger. It is a slow burn, a candle lit in the dark, waiting for the right moment to set the whole room ablaze. And as I sat there in the silence of my room, listening to their muffled laughter downstairs, I realized one thing. The people you trust to protect you are sometimes the very people who sharpen the knives meant for your back. And once you realize that, you never see them the same way again. What they didn't know was that stepping away from the family account wasn't just an idle threat. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that would turn their world upside down. But for now, I kept my secret. I let them believe I was broken. I let them believe they had won. The truth was, the game had only just begun. They don't yet know the full meaning of her words about stepping away from the family account. The hours after that dinner stretched longer than any night I can remember. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sting of Marcus's words replaying in my head. You don't belong in this family anymore. The cruelty in his voice had been sharpened by years of being coddled, of being given everything, while I had been treated like an afterthought. But what made it worse wasn't his words, it was my parents' silence. Their silence was permission. Their silence was agreement. Their silence was betrayal. I thought about every moment I had sacrificed for them. Every time I stayed home to babysit Marcus while my friends went out. Every time I took on chores so my mother could rest, only for her to later tell me I wasn't doing enough. Every night I stayed up studying, determined to be the pride of this family, only to watch them beam at Marcus when he managed to scrape by with the bare minimum. It wasn't just about that night. It was about years of being unseen, unwanted, and unloved. That dinner was simply the confirmation of what I had always feared. I had never truly belonged. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't as powerless as they thought. When I mentioned stepping away from the family account, I wasn't bluffing. Years earlier, when my grandmother was still alive, she had entrusted me with certain responsibilities. She always said I was the only one she could rely on, the only one with enough sense to manage things properly. She had quietly added my name to several documents, giving me shared control over accounts, investments, and even the deed to one of the family's properties. She told no one else, not my parents, not Marcus, not Clara. She said it was our little secret, a way of protecting the family's future. I didn't fully understand the weight of it then, but now it was everything. I held those documents in my lap that night, my fingers trembling as I traced the signatures. They were my grandmother's parting gift to me, and suddenly they felt like weapons. Not swords to slash recklessly, but carefully hidden daggers, waiting for the right moment to pierce. Still, I didn't act. Not yet. Anger is loud, but revenge must be quiet. If I wanted them to feel what I had felt, to experience the cold emptiness of being abandoned by those they trusted, I needed patience. I needed them to believe I had accepted their cruelty, to think they had broken me beyond repair. Only then would the truth strike hardest. So the next morning, I carried on as if nothing had happened. I came down to breakfast, poured myself coffee, and sat in silence while Marcus chatted about his latest accomplishments. My parents nodded proudly, their eyes lighting up at every word. Not once did they look at me. Not once did they apologize. Clara sat across the table, smirking at me as though she had won a battle I hadn't realized I was fighting. I sipped my coffee, pretending not to care. But inside, my fury was simmering, my resolve hardening. The days turned into weeks. I kept my distance, stayed quiet, and let them think they had pushed me aside. It was easier than I expected. After all, they rarely noticed me anyway. Marcus thrived in the spotlight, my parents basked in his glow, and Clara attached herself like a parasite to the new favorite branch of the family. I watched from the shadows, silently biding my time. But silence doesn't last forever. The first crack appeared in the most unexpected way. One evening, I overheard Marcus arguing with my father in the living room. His voice was sharp, desperate. "I told you I need more. How am I supposed to keep up with my expenses? Do you know how embarrassing it is to have to explain to my friends that my own family won't support me?" My father sighed heavily. You've been given enough, Marcus. We can't just hand you money every time you ask for it. I peeked from the hallway, my breath caught in my throat. Marcus's face was flushed red with anger. But Rachel's wasting money too. She's probably leeching off the account, and you don't even notice. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my chest.
Me?
Wasting money? The irony was suffocating. If only they knew that I had quietly been contributing more than Marcus ever did, balancing out the reckless withdrawals he made. If only they knew that without me, the account would have been empty long ago. But they didn't. And I wasn't about to tell them.
Not yet.
My father's response was muffled, but the tone was unmistakable, defensive, almost fearful. And that was when I realized something important. Marcus's greed wasn't just a flaw, it was a weakness. A weakness I could use. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the ways I could unravel him. All the ways I could let his own arrogance destroy him. The idea of revenge no longer felt like a flame. It felt like a storm, building momentum, waiting to break. And then, the opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. It was another family dinner. My parents had invited Clara again, of course. Marcus was in rare form, bragging about a new watch he had bought, even though I knew he couldn't afford it. He spoke with that smug confidence of someone who had never truly faced consequences. "This family has always taken care of me," he said, smirking in my direction. "And it always will." Clara giggled. My parents smiled indulgently. I clenched my jaw, but kept my expression neutral. Then Marcus leaned forward and added, "Unlike some people who only take and never give." I felt my hands tighten around my fork. The urge to throw the truth in his face right then, and it was overwhelming. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. A small, calm smile that made Marcus falter for just a second. "I'm glad you feel so secure, Marcus," I said softly. "It must be nice to know you'll never have to worry about money." His eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering behind them. But before he could respond, my father changed the subject, and the moment passed. Yet I could see it, the doubt I had planted in his mind. A seed that would grow, gnawing at him in the quiet hours of the night. Because Marcus didn't know the truth. He didn't know that his security was built on the foundation I had quietly maintained. And when I took that away, his world would crumble. The satisfaction of knowing what was coming almost made me giddy. But I stayed quiet, patient, controlled. I wanted him to dig his own grave before I revealed I was the one holding the shovel. And dig he did. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's spending grew more reckless. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, extravagant gifts for people who only liked him for his money. He was desperate to prove his worth, to maintain the image he thought made him untouchable. My parents enabled him, of course, blind to the reality that their golden boy was burying them all in debt. And I waited for the exact moment when pulling one string would unravel everything. That moment came one night, at 3:07 in the morning. My phone lit up on the nightstand, buzzing relentlessly. I blinked at the screen, 5 missed calls, then 10, then 20. By sunrise, there were 72. My mother's voice filled my voicemail, shrill and panicked. "Rachel, what have you done? The mortgage payment bounced. The cards are frozen. Everything is locked. What did you do?" I listened, heart pounding, as one after another, their frantic voices filled the line. Marcus yelling, my father pleading, my mother screaming. Clara's voice even slipped in at one point, demanding I call back. I sat in bed, the early morning light spilling through my window, and for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. I calmly dialed back, waited for the line to connect. My mother answered, her voice trembling with rage. "What did you do?" I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and said, "I'm just respecting your decision. You told me I don't belong in this family anymore."
"I'm only honoring that."
The silence on the other end was deafening. Then the shouting began again. But I didn't listen. I hung up, my hands steady, my heart calm. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning, because the frozen accounts were just the first domino. And the next one was about to fall. The accounts are frozen, but she hints that something far bigger is about to unravel. The morning after the calls, my phone stayed silent. No apologies, no explanations, just the quiet aftermath of a storm they didn't realize had only begun. I got up slowly, stretched, and walked past the kitchen where my parents and Marcus were huddled, whispering in frantic tones. The look on their faces was priceless. Pale, panicked, desperate. Clara sat at the table with wide eyes, like a child watching her favorite show suddenly turn into a horror movie. They froze when they saw me. Marcus leapt to his feet, his arrogance stripped bare, replaced with fear. "What did you do, Rachel?" he shouted. I raised an eyebrow, calm as ever. "Nothing you didn't ask me to," I said. I stepped away, just like you told me to. My mother's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. "Don't be cruel," she whispered, her voice sharp with suppressed panic. "This isn't funny. The mortgage bounced, the credit cards declined, and the bank won't explain anything. Do you know what that means?" "I know exactly what it means," I replied softly. "It means reality is finally catching up." Marcus slammed his fist on the table. "You're lying. You don't have that kind of control." But his words faltered. He didn't sound convinced. He sounded like someone who knew, deep down, that I had always been closer to the truth than they wanted to admit. I leaned forward just slightly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you really want to test me, Marcus?" The silence that followed was deafening. My father cleared his throat, his tone measured. "Rachel, let's not escalate this. We're family. Whatever this is, we can work it out." Family. That word again. The word they wielded like a shield whenever it suited them. The word they twisted into a leash whenever they wanted to control me. I almost laughed. I straightened, fixing my gaze on my father. "You made it clear I wasn't family when you stayed silent the night Marcus told me to leave. Don't try to use that word now." His face flushed, shame flickering across his features. But still, he said nothing more. The days that followed were chaos for them. I watched from the shadows as they scrambled. Calls to the bank went unanswered. Their credit was frozen. The mortgage payments bounced again. Marcus tried to make a big show of being unaffected, flaunting his new watch and talking about his connections, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Clara whispered frantically behind closed doors, trying to piece together what had happened, but she was as clueless as the rest. Meanwhile, I went about my life quietly, calmly. I still went to work, I still smiled at the neighbors, I still paid my own bills on time, without issue. While their world fell apart, mine remained steady. It was the first time I truly understood the sweetness of revenge, not in loud declarations, not in fiery confrontations, but in the quiet power of knowing you held all the cards while your enemies scrambled in the dark. But revenge has layers, and this was only the first. One evening, Marcus stormed into my room without knocking. His face was red, his hair disheveled, and his hands shook as he pointed a finger at me. "You're going to fix this," he snarled. "Do you hear me? You're going to fix this, or you'll regret it." I closed the book I was reading, looked up slowly, and said, "Or what?" He blinked, caught off guard. His threats had always worked on my parents, always gotten him what he wanted. But I wasn't them. I had no reason to fear him anymore. I'll tell everyone what you did," he stammered. "I'll ruin your name." I tilted my head, smiling faintly. "Marcus, you've spent your whole life ruining your own name. I don't need to help you with that." He growled in frustration, slammed my door shut, and stomped down the hall. I let out a slow breath, my pulse steady. Every confrontation with him was proof of how unprepared he was to face the truth. He wasn't built for consequences. He had lived his whole life sheltered from them. And now he was about to drown in them. The cracks widened quickly. Marcus's so-called friends began to disappear once his credit card stopped working. Clara grew restless when she realized there were no more lavish gifts or dinners. My parents stopped answering the phone to avoid the collectors calling day and night. The house that had always been filled with smug laughter and casual cruelty was suddenly filled with silence, broken only by whispered arguments and slammed doors. And through it all, I waited. I waited until the exact moment when they were at their weakest. That moment came when the bank finally sent a notice. The house, our family home, was under foreclosure review. My parents clutched the letter like it was a death sentence, their faces pale, their hands shaking. Marcus raged, blaming everyone but himself. Clara wept dramatically, though I noticed her eyes darting toward her phone, probably already searching for her next opportunity. My mother turned to me at last, her eyes desperate. "Rachel," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please help us. You're the responsible one.
You always have been.
Please do something." For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the look on her face at that dinner, the way she kept her head down while Marcus gutted me with his words, the way she silently agreed that I didn't belong. That memory hardened me like stone. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You made it clear I wasn't part of this family anymore. Why would I step in now?" Tears filled her eyes. "Because you're better than this." I let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of her words. Then I said, "Maybe I am. Or maybe I finally learned from all of you." Her sob caught in her throat, and I stood, walking away before she could respond. But the truth was, I had already decided. I wasn't just going to let them drown. I was going to make sure they understood exactly what it felt like to choke on betrayal. They had stolen my belonging, my identity, my worth. I was going to take something from them they could never replace. And that's when I remembered the second set of documents my grandmother had left me. The ones that didn't just give me access to the family account, but gave me power over something much bigger. Something they never even knew I had. She hints at a second, bigger secret from her grandmother's documents, something beyond the frozen accounts. The second set of documents had been tucked away in a faded leather folder, the kind my grandmother always used for her most important papers. When she gave them to me years before her death, she didn't explain everything in detail. She simply looked me in the eye and said, "You'll understand when the time comes, Rachel. Protect yourself, and protect what matters." At the time, I hadn't fully grasped the gravity of those words. But now, with my family circling the drain and clawing at me for help, I opened that folder and finally understood. Inside were property deeds, investment records, and trust accounts. Assets my grandmother had shielded from the rest of the family, keeping them hidden under her sole control until she passed. And in her will, she had left them to me, bypassing my parents, bypassing Marcus, bypassing everyone else. She had trusted me, and only me, to manage them. At first, the weight of it felt overwhelming. These weren't just numbers or papers. They were power, real power. And for the first time, I realized I was holding the keys to more than just the family's survival. I was holding the keys to their downfall. The irony made me laugh. All those years, they treated me like an outsider, like I didn't belong. And yet, I was the one my grandmother had trusted most. I was the one she believed in. While they sneered and ignored me, she had quietly prepared me for this moment. So when my mother begged for help, when my father lowered his pride enough to mutter that maybe I could look into things, when Marcus threatened and Clara whined, I held my silence. I let them believe I was indifferent. I let them stew in their panic. And all the while, I studied those documents, piecing together a plan. The first step was simple: access the trust account. It held more money than my parents would ever believe, money that could save them 10 times over. But I had no intention of saving them. Not yet. Instead, I transferred a small amount, just enough to cover my own expenses for the foreseeable future, into a separate account in my name only. Quiet, invisible, untouchable. Then I waited. The foreclosure process moved forward. Notices arrived in the mail, each one more urgent than the last. My parents grew haggard, their faces etched with worry lines I had never seen before. Marcus became volatile, lashing out at everyone, even Clara, who eventually stopped coming around as often. He had no one left to impress, and no resources left to lean on. It was almost too easy. One evening, I came home to find Marcus pacing the living room like a caged animal. My father sat with his head in his hands, while my mother cried softly into a tissue. They looked up at me as I walked in, their eyes filled with something I had never seen before, desperation mixed with shame. "Rachel," my father began, his voice rough. We know your grandmother trusted you with certain things.
We need you to step in.
If you don't, we'll lose the house. We'll lose everything." Marcus spun on me, his face twisted with anger. "This is your fault. You think you're so clever, don't you? Watching us fall apart while you sit there smug. Well, it won't last. I'll find a way to expose you. I'll ruin you." I smiled faintly, unbothered. "Funny, Marcus. You've been trying to ruin me my whole life. How's that working out for you now?" His fists clenched, his chest heaved, but he said nothing. For once, he had no audience to cheer him on. My mother reached for my hand, her touch trembling. "Please, Rachel. You're our daughter. We can't survive without you." The words should have melted me. They should have soothed the years of wounds. But instead, they only deepened the ache. Where was this desperation when I needed their love? Where was this concern when I was the one cast out at the dinner table? It wasn't love driving her now, it was survival. And I wasn't about to hand it to her so easily. I pulled my hand back slowly, meeting her tear-filled gaze. "You didn't want me in this family. You made that clear. And now, you only want me because you need me. That's not family. That's convenience." Her sob filled the room, and I walked away, the sound of her cries echoing behind me. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My grandmother's voice haunted me. "Protect yourself, and protect what matters." What mattered now? Was it vengeance? Or was it proving, once and for all, that I was more than what they had made me feel? The line blurred in my mind, twisting and merging until I could no longer tell if I was protecting myself or simply enjoying their suffering. But one thing was certain, I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Because the deeds in that folder revealed something even more devastating than the trust account. Something that would strike deeper than frozen credit cards or bounced mortgages. The family home, the one my parents were so desperate to save, wasn't theirs at all. It was mine. My grandmother had signed it over years before she passed, her will ensuring it bypassed every one of them. They had lived all this time under the illusion that the house was theirs, when in reality, it was in my name. They had laughed, mocked, and excluded me under a roof I legally owned. And now, with the foreclosure looming, with their backs against the wall, I held the one card that could shatter them completely. All I had to do was play it. She reveals the ultimate twist, that the family home legally belongs to her. The realization hit me like a storm. The house was mine. My grandmother had ensured that the very roof they lorded over me under, the place they treated as their kingdom, was signed over to me years ago. They had mocked me, ignored me, and even wished me gone, all while living in my house. I sat in my room with the papers spread out in front of me, the truth burning in my chest. At first, I wanted to scream it in their faces, to shout that every insult they'd hurled at me had been thrown from the comfort of a home they didn't even own. But I stopped myself. Revenge was sweeter when it was timed. If I moved too fast, the shock wouldn't land. So I waited. The bank's foreclosure letters stacked higher, and the family grew more desperate by the day. My father stopped going into work, as if hiding from the world would make the debts disappear. My mother's once perfect hair was always disheveled, her makeup streaked from crying. Marcus looked like a man unraveling, snapping at everyone, cursing Clara when she dared to suggest he calm down. And then came the night I'd been waiting for. They gathered in the living room, all of them slumped and beaten down by failure. My father finally looked at me, not with superiority, not with disdain, but with something else. Dependence. "Rachel," he said quietly, "we can't do this without you. If you've got something, anything, this is the time." My mother added quickly, "We'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Just don't let them take the house." I looked at their tired faces, and for the first time, they seemed human to me. Vulnerable. Fragile. But then I remembered the years of being shoved aside, mocked, left out. I remembered Marcus sneering, "You'll never be anything, Rachel." I cleared my throat and dropped the bomb. The house isn't yours to lose. It never was. It's mine. The silence was instant, heavy, almost suffocating. "What?" my father croaked. I slid the deed across the table. "Grandma signed it over to me years ago. You've been living under my roof all this time." My mother gasped, clutching her chest. My father's face turned red, veins standing out in his forehead. "But Marcus," Marcus exploded. "You're lying. This is some trick, some scam." He grabbed the papers, scanning them with shaking hands. And when he saw the notarized signatures, the official stamps, his face went pale. He looked at me with pure venom. "You don't deserve this," he spat. "You don't deserve any of it." I leaned back, calm, almost amused. Maybe not. But Grandma thought I did. And legally, that's all that matters. The room erupted. My mother begged me not to turn against the family. My father accused me of betraying them. Marcus swore he'd find a way to challenge it in court. But their words didn't matter anymore. I had the power. For the first time, I wasn't the forgotten girl in the corner. I was the one holding the strings. That night, I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at them as they argued and panicked. And I realized something important. This wasn't just about the house. This was about years of silence, years of being the invisible one. Now, they had no choice but to see me. But seeing me was only the beginning. Because owning the house gave me more than security. It gave me leverage. And I wasn't about to waste it on pity or second chances. I was going to use it to take everything. She declares her plan to use ownership of the house as leverage, not to save them, but to strip them of everything. I didn't want drama. I wanted effectiveness. The longer I'd watched them fumble, the clearer it became that theatrical confrontations only fed their sense of victimhood and allowed them to shrug off responsibility. If I was going to make them feel the exact weight of what they'd done to me, it had to be direct, undeniable, and clinical, a set of rules applied the way a surgeon closes an incision. Neat, irreversible, and final. The first move was paperwork. I drafted a formal stewardship agreement that spelled out responsibilities in language that left no wiggle room. Mortgage payments, utility splits, account access, guest privileges, maintenance obligations. I included a clause about conduct in the home. No theft, no misrepresentation of assets, no financial maneuvers without prior written consent. I framed everything as estate preservation, but anyone reading it would know the subtext: behave like an adult, or face consequences. When I slid the agreement across the kitchen table, my parents' hands trembled as if touching the document might burn them. Marcus pushed it aside like it was a gag order. "You can't make us sign something like that," he spat. "This is our home." "It has always been a home," I said, voice steady. "But a home is maintained by those who respect it. This is not punishment. It's accountability." They argued, begged, schemed, the same loops they'd twisted around every test life threw at them. But when I produced copies of the trust clauses and the deed, when I showed them the legal scaffolding that allowed me to place reasonable conditions on occupancy, their mouths closed. For the first time, there was a script they hadn't rehearsed. Over the next week, I enforced the rules. I set up a controlled account for household expenses and required all discretionary spending to pass through it. I froze credit access tied to the estate and required Marcus to provide documentation for any borrowing. I changed locks on the storage where jewelry and family heirlooms had been borrowed and never returned. I made inventories and put serial numbers next to items that had once been pride trophies. Every action had a paper trail. Every paper trail could be audited. It was bureaucratic warfare, and it worked in a way punches never would. Marcus flailed, then pleaded, then sulked, the stages of a man who had always relied on other people's goodwill suddenly learning how thin that goodwill really was. Clara, who had been a second-hand beneficiary of his charm, realized quickly that the afternoons of opulent gifts were over. She tried the old social tricks, crying in my mother's lap, feigning ignorance, but those were recycled lines. They had no currency here. Neighbors noticed the change. Where there had once been loud Sunday barbecues and lavish Saturday gatherings, there were now scheduled meetings and accountant visits. Some stopped speaking to us at all. Others sent sympathetic texts that felt like gauze on a fresh wound. The gossip mill hummed, but it no longer controlled the narrative. I did. There were small retaliations. One morning I found a smear of coffee on the new ledger I kept, a childish attempt at sabotage. Another night, someone left the back gate open so the dog ran out and tore up a neighbor's flower bed. Petty, intended to force me to apologize. Each childish act only tightened my resolve. I logged everything. Evidence is a quiet, implacable witness. Then came the eviction notice. I didn't deliver it like a wolf at the door. I served it like a fact. It outlined staged remedies tied to compliance. If they adhered to the stewardship plan for 6 months, eviction would not be necessary. If they failed, the trust allowed for removal of occupants who endangered the estate. It was reasonable on the page, terrifying in its promise. I copied the notice to a court clerk and sent it by certified mail. The receipt arrived like a verdict. My mother broke down when she read it. My father paced and muttered about lawyers. Marcus raged and threatened, his voice cracking under strain. Clara called her friends, then left to clear her head for 2 days. The house, once a theater of casual cruelty, turned into a room of quiet, furious calculations. At night, when the house slept in jagged fits, I would sit at the window and think about the person I was becoming. Revenge had never been the point, accountability had. But the two looked similar in the faces of people who had never learned to be accountable. I reminded myself that this was not cruelty for its own sake. This was a ledger balancing itself at last. And then something unexpected happened. Marcus vanished. Not in a dramatic escape, not in a suave disappearance, but simply gone. His room was emptied of everything significant, clothes folded, small belongings missing, even his favorite mug. There was no note. His phone went straight to voicemail. Clara looked guilty, feigning worry, but avoiding my eyes. The neighborhood rumor machine offered up 100 explanations. Fled, left town, couch surfing with a friend. No one truly knew. For a few days the house breathed easier under a thin veil of calm. I fielded calls from collectors and arranged for structured payments. I negotiated with lawyers. I held meetings that felt like rehearsals for a life I'd never expected to run. Trustee briefings, oversight committee calls, and small reconciliations with people who had once thought me invisible. The pressure shifted from crisis mode toward remediation. It was satisfying. Quietly, painfully satisfying. Then, one evening as twilight doused the hallway in blue, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in a crisp suit I did not recognize, a woman with an impeccable haircut at his side, and behind them a cameraman holding a small boom mic. "Miss Thompson?" the man asked, his smile professional, eyes measuring. "I'm Alan Price. I represent a third-party claimant connected to past investments tied to this property. We have reason to believe there may be irregularities in the trust administration. We'd like to ask you a few questions." The cameraman's lens blinked like a stranger's eye. For a second, I thought of the tribunal, the way outside forces could turn private wounds into public spectacle. My chest tightened. All the careful work, the stewardship, the audits. Suddenly there were people at the gate who could fasten a new kind of chain. I stepped back, arresting my calm. "Come in," I said, and watched them cross my threshold as if they were walking into the belly of the machine I had started. My hands were steady, but my skin prickled. They sat at my kitchen table and opened a slim folder. "We're not enemies," the woman said, voice soft as honey. "We just want what's fair. And if there's an issue, we'll resolve it." Her tone was disarming. Her smile was practiced. But the cameraman's presence was not reassuring. It felt like an immediate pivot toward exposure, toward headlines, toward every intimate ledger and familial bruise being cataloged for strangers to chew. As she spoke, I realized that the game had widened. I had forced my family into honesty and consequence, but now forces beyond them had found interest. My leverage had drawn attention, and attention attracts other hands with agendas that do not care about nuance. I listened to them outline their concerns, felt my pulse steady into a slow, dangerous calm, and prepared my reply. I was ready to defend the trust, to show the audits, to stand before any tribunal. I had learned how to speak their language. But as they reached for the next file and the cameraman adjusted his lens, another sound cut through the house, the low, steady rumble of an engine pulling up outside. On the porch, through the window, a sleek black SUV idled. Its driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out, someone I hadn't seen in years and had never wanted to see again. The air shifted, colder somehow, as memories slammed into the present. I felt my breath hitch. The woman from the SUV walked toward the front steps with the slow assurance of someone who has returned to collect a debt. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them, meeting the visitors at my table with a smile that was practiced and lethal. The front door clicked as it opened. The woman from the black SUV crosses the threshold, a figure from the narrator's past whose arrival promises complication. Who is she, and what does she want? The door swung open, and she stepped inside, tall, confident, wearing a coat that somehow made every inch of her posture radiate authority. I had not seen her in years, and yet recognition slammed into me like a door hitting a wall. Olivia. The name I had not spoken aloud in over a decade. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the kitchen. They met mine with a measured calm that mirrored my own. She smiled, but it was not warmth she offered. It was acknowledgement. Of everything. Of the ledgered history, of the quiet wars, of the precise control I had imposed. She had come to settle her own account. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, voice smooth, controlled. "But we have unfinished business." I motioned to the table.
Sit.
"You'll find I've prepared for exactly that." The cameraman froze in place, and Alan Price scribbled something in his notebook, but I ignored them. This was no longer about audits or trust clauses. This was about history, about debts that could not be measured on paper. Olivia sat, hands folded neatly. "I heard about the changes you've made. The stewardship, the audits, your family must be terrified." "They are," I said evenly. "And rightly so. But terror isn't the point. Accountability is. Everything here is documented. Every transaction, every breach, every petty rebellion. It is all recorded. You, of all people, should appreciate the precision." A shadow of amusement flickered across her face. "I do. That's why I'm here. I've been following your work. Impressive. Surgical, really. But even the most precise systems have gaps. And I'm here to make sure none remain." I felt the room tilt slightly, as if the walls themselves were recalibrating to accommodate this new gravity. Olivia had come with purpose, and it was clear she was not here to charm or negotiate. She was here to reclaim leverage she had long lost. For the next hour, we exchanged documents, cross-referenced ledgers, and outlined every angle of liability. Every attempt at manipulation I had anticipated was countered with facts she produced, facts that neither Marcus nor Clara nor even my parents could touch. Yet, unlike my family, Olivia never faltered under scrutiny. She acknowledged errors with grace and pointed out inconsistencies with surgical precision. By the time she rose, the sun had set completely, casting the kitchen in a wash of amber from the overhead lights. "I think we understand each other now," she said. "Your family will comply. Your estate is secure. And any attempts to subvert that will be visible to both of us. But know this." She leaned closer, voice almost a whisper. "I will be watching. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. Some mistakes are too costly to leave unchecked." I nodded. I expected nothing less. She turned to leave. The SUV waited, engine purring like a predator at the curb. She paused at the threshold, glanced back once, and for the briefest moment, the old connection, respect, rivalry, something unspoken, passed between us. Then she was gone. Silence settled over the house. It was not the quiet of absence, nor of defeat. It was the quiet of completion. Marcus and Clara, forced to reckon with every audit, every notice, every rule, had begun to comply in ways that could not be faked. My parents, finally aware that home meant responsibility as much as inheritance, found a fragile respect for the boundaries I had set. I walked through the house, noting the orderly rooms, the documented ledgers, the evidence of a household transformed. For the first time, there was a sense of ownership not born of bloodline entitlement, but of principle. Sitting by the window, I let the ledger rest on my lap. Revenge had never been my aim. Justice, accountability, precision, those were my tools. And now, at last, the scales were balanced. Outside, the street was quiet. Somewhere, a dog barked, a car passed, a neighbor tended their garden. Life moved forward. I closed the ledger, knowing that every page, every rule, every carefully logged action had led here, to calm, to certainty, to a house finally under the governance it deserved. And somewhere, miles away, Olivia drove through the city streets, her own work complete, leaving me with the final, irrefutable truth. Control, when exercised with patience and clarity, could reshape not just a home, but the people within it. The door clicked shut. I smiled, not in triumph, but in finality. The story had ended.